If you can hear my voice, please say shh. The honourable member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising on a point of question of privilege further to the notice that I gave earlier today concerning revelations published in the Globe and Mail yesterday concerning efforts by a diplomat of the People's Republic of China accredited by the Government of Canada to target me and my family as a consequence of my February 22nd, 2021 vote on the Conservative Opposition Day motion, which I moved, condemning the government of the People's Republic of China and its treatment of its Uyghur minority as a genocide. House of Commons Procedure and Practice 3rd edition states at page 107, quote, "In order to fulfill their parliamentary duties, members should be able to go about their parliamentary business undisturbed. Any form of intimidation of a member with respect to the member's actions during a proceeding in Parliament could amount to contempt," end quote. This is long-standing and well-established procedure and principle of the law of parliamentary privilege, tracing its roots back to an April 12, 1733 resolution of the British House of Commons, quote, "that the assaulting, insulting, or menacing any member of this House in his coming to or going from the House or upon the account of his behaviour in Parliament is a high infringement of the privilege of this House, a most outrageous and dangerous violation of the rights of Parliament, and a high crime and misdemeanour," end quote. To be clear, Mr. Speaker, this privilege is not being asserted, and nor do I assert it today, against any Canadian who exercises his or her fundamental democratic right to enter into political debate and criticize elected members of this House for the stands they take. Joseph Magno, at page 235 of Parliamentary Privilege in Canada, 2nd edition, articulates the appropriate balance between free debate and intimidation and coercion. Quote, "All interferences with members' privileges of freedom of speech, such as editorials and other public comment, are not breaches of privilege, even though they influence the conduct of members in their parliamentary work. Accordingly, not every action by an outside body that may influence the conduct of a member of Parliament, as such, could now be regarded as a breach of privilege, even if it were calculated and intended to bring pressure on the member to take or to refrain from taking a particular course. But any attempt by improper means to influence or obstruct a member in this parliamentary work may constitute contempt. What constitutes an improper means of interfering with members' parliamentary work is always a question depending on the facts of each case," end quote. And here, Mr. Speaker, are the facts of the present case. Yesterday's Globe and Mail reported that the government of the People's Republic of China, quote, "sees Canada as a high priority target and employs incentives and punishment as part of a vast influence network directed at legislators, business executives, and diaspora communities here in this country, according to a top secret intelligence assessment from the Canadian Security Intelligence Service," end quote. Later on in the report, Robert Fife and Stephen Chase write, quote, "The report, the People's Republic of China Foreign Interference in Canada, a critical national security threat, lists several examples of Chinese influence operations aimed at the opposition Conservative Party. It says CSIS reporting from 2021 indicates that China's intelligence agency, the Ministry of State Security, has taken specific actions to target Canadian MPs who are linked to the February 2021 parliamentary motion condemning Beijing's oppression of Uyghurs and other Turkic minorities. The motion, which passed, declared China's conduct to amount to genocide. The spy agency said an MSS officer sought information on an unnamed Canadian MP's relatives who may be located in the PRC for further potential sanctions. This effort, the CSIS report said, is almost certainly meant to make an example of this MP and deter others from taking anti-PRC positions. A national security source, whom the Globe is not naming because they risk prosecution under the Security of Information Act, said the MP targeted was Conservative MP and by name, and that Zhao Wei, a Chinese diplomat in Canada, was working on this matter, end quote. The motion in question, Mr. Speaker, was a Conservative motion I introduced and moved in this House that was adopted on February 22nd, 2021. Despite knowing about this intimidation operation involving a diplomat approved by the Government of Canada for 2 years, the government did not inform me that a diplomat was targeting my family, nor did the government take any action to expel this diplomat responsible for orchestrating this intimidation campaign. In fact, Mr. Wei Zhao continues to have the government's authorization to be in and work in Canada with immunity on behalf of Beijing's government. Frankly, I think, Mr. Speaker, this demonstrates a complete lack of common decency and leadership. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, not a single diplomat of Beijing's has been expelled by this government since the news of Beijing's foreign interference threat activities have been reported on for the last couple of years. Nonetheless, the fact remains that this intimidation operation was launched and was in direct consequence of my motion in this House concerning the treatment of Uyghurs. These are the facts, Mr. Speaker. Bosque and Gagnon observe on page 109, quote, in order to find a prima facie breach of privilege, the Speaker must be satisfied that there is evidence to support the member's claim that he or she has been impeded in the performance of his or her parliamentary functions, and that the matter is directly related to a proceeding in Parliament, end quote. A proceeding in Parliament, Mr. Speaker, is a technical term for which Bosque and Gagnon at page 90 refer to two definitions, one from the United Kingdom's Erskine May and the other from Australia's Parliamentary Privileges Act 1987. May's definition, taken from page 235 of the 24th edition, states that, quote, an individual member takes part in a proceeding usually by speech, but also by various recognized forms of formal action, such as voting, giving notice of a motion, or presenting a petition or report from a committee, most of such actions being time-saving substitutes for speaking, end quote. The Australian statutory definition, meanwhile, contains the expression, quote, all words spoken or acts done in the course of or for purposes of or incidental to the transacting of business of the House or a committee, end quote. A long line of precedents, Mr. Speaker, affirm the right of members to go about their parliamentary duties free of intimidation. Speaker Lamoureux, on September 19th, 1973, said at page 6,709 of the debates that he had, quote, no hesitation in affirming the principle that parliamentary privilege includes the right of a member to discharge his responsibilities as a member of this House free from threats or attempts at intimidation, end quote. On May 1st, 1986, Speaker Bosley held at page 12,847 of the debates, quote, if an honourable member is impeded or obstructed in the performance of his or her parliamentary duties through threats, intimidation, bribery attempts, or other improper behaviour, such a case would fall within the limits of parliamentary privilege, end quote. And subsequently, Mr. Speaker, Speaker Perrin, on March 21st, 1994, commented at page 2,706 of the debates, quote, threats of blackmail or intimidation of a member of parliament should never be taken lightly. When such occurs, the very essence of free speech is undermined. Without the guarantee of freedom of speech, no member can do his duty as expected, end quote. More recently, Mr. Speaker, on March 6, 2012, a prima facie contempt was found at page 5,834 of the debates, rising from an intimidation campaign of YouTube videos from the internet, Hacking Collective Anonymous, largely targeting a former colleague and his family members as a consequence of legislation this colleague tabled in the House. In so ruling, the Speaker said, quote, there are those who enter political life fully expect to be able to be held accountable for the actions to their constituents and to those who are concerned with the issues and initiatives they may advocate. In a healthy democracy, vigorous debate on issues is encouraged. In fact, the rules and procedures of this House are drafted to allow proponents and opponents to discuss in a respectful manner even the most difficult and sensitive of matters. However, when duly elected members are personally threatened for their work in Parliament, whether introducing a bill, making a statement, or casting a vote, this House must take the matter very seriously, end quote. I would echo those words, Mr. Speaker. This House must take this issue very seriously. And while I am speaking of my own situation today, I am far from alone in experiencing Beijing's foreign interference threat activities. Debates inside and outside of this House since November have been dominated by a succession of breathtaking disclosures from our national security experts, revealed by multiple media outlets of a concerted and organized campaign by Beijing's communist government to manipulate Canadian politics and the proceedings of this House in favor of that government's positions. Equally concerning has been the Canadian government's failure to do anything to curb it. This latest report of the Globe and Mail demonstrates that this scourge of foreign interference threat activities directed at members of this House is not limited to elections, not limited to party nominations and diaspora communities. This nefarious campaign's reach into parliamentary proceedings is a new fact, but one which we shouldn't be too surprised about. Just as it is a novel concern in this unraveling, recently surfaced story, and for this House generally, to consider interference and intimidation by foreign state actors, that is not a procedural impediment for you, Mr. Speaker, to find a prima facie case of contempt here. On this particular point, O'Brien, Bosque and Gagnon comment at page 81, the House of Commons enjoys very wide latitude in maintaining its dignity and authority through the exercise of its contempt power. In other words, the House may consider any misconduct to be contempt and may deal with it accordingly. This area of parliamentary law is therefore extremely fluid and most valuable for the Commons to be able to meet novel situations, end quote. They add at page 112, quote, it is impossible to codify all incidents which might be interpreted as matters of obstruction, interference, molestation, or intimidation, and as such constitute prima facie cases of contempt, end quote. Before closing, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to add one final point. Our authorities refer to the need for questions of privilege to be raised at the earliest opportunity in the House. And while the Globe and Mail report was published yesterday morning, this afternoon is the first opportunity I've had to raise this point of privilege. In fact, it's the first time I've been up in the House. This afternoon has been the first time I've been up in the House since the report was first published in the Globe and Mail. In addition, I had to reflect on and seek counsel about the best way to move forward regarding these concerns, as you, Mr. Speaker, are aware. In addition, I confirmed the serious, grave details in the Globe report, including that an individual in Canada, Mr. Zhao, accredited by the Government of Canada, was involved in conducting these intimidation operations. Mr. Speaker, I trust that in the circumstances you would not impose the narrowest possible interpretation to the earliest opportunity to raise this in the House, so as to deny me the opportunity to raise this very important matter of foreign intimidation operations directed at elected members of Parliament. That is because it has become even clearer in the last 24 hours that members of Parliament, certainly opposition members, and Canadians at large cannot rely upon the Government of Canada, the executive branch of our system, to discharge its role as a defender of the realm. That's why Parliament, and this House in particular, must vindicate its own authority and protect our own interests and those of the members of this place when those interests are under threat, as we now see. And Mr. Speaker, I plead to you that it now falls to you, sir, as the guardian of our rights and privileges, to send a clear and unambiguous signal that this sort of conduct on part of the People's Republic of China is simply unacceptable. Should you agree, Mr. Speaker, I would be prepared to move the appropriate motion at the appropriate time. Thank you very much for your consideration.
I want to thank the honourable member for Wellington Halton Hills, and I will return with a ruling as soon as possible. Thank you. The honourable parliamentary secretary to the government house leader is rising on the same point.
Mr. Speaker, as the government has clearly indicated, any form of foreign interference or intimidation is completely unacceptable, and I'll reserve the opportunity maybe to return to you or your office as to if there's going to be any further comment coming from the government.
Okay, the honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
I would like to extend my my heartfelt. I feel very sad that this has happened to the member for Halton Hills. This is shocking. I think all of us in this House are shocked, and I think we can all agree that this is something that, while affecting one member of this House, also affects many Chinese Canadian citizens across the country. This has been something that's been raised time and time again. We would like to come forward with further discussion and debate on this at a later date.
For
the honourable member for Lac Saint Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois, I would like to express our wholehearted support to our colleague who is currently experiencing a very difficult situation, as well as to his family. And I think all the members of this House must support our colleague, and the Bloc Québécois certainly does. And I think if anyone was in his shoes, they would feel the same way. So the member can count on our support, and light needs to be shed on this matter. Thank you.
Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am grateful to have just a few words, not many. In case Canadians watching this don't know the quality and the integrity of the honourable member for Wellington Halton Hills, I want to attest to it here in nonpartisan fashion that this is an exemplary member of Parliament. This is an outrage that any foreign government would target him and his family. And since I've had the honour of serving here since exactly 12 years ago today when elected, I've known no finer parliamentarian than the honourable member for Wellington Halton Hills. Any member being treated in this way is offensive, but partisanship obviously happens here. I want to, in the nonpartisan way, attest to the integrity, character, and extraordinary ethical framework of this member, and ask that his concerns be addressed with diligence.
And I want to thank everyone. And we'll continue orders of the day.